Climb into the cockpit with pilot and LinkSquares Chief Legal Officer Tim Parilla as he invites legal leaders aboard to share advice that will help you navigate even the most turbulent times of in-house counsel work. We'll cover a range of topics from data privacy to legal team structure to public company transactions and beyond. You don't want to miss this series. Fasten your seatbelt and prepare for takeoff. You're listening to Cockpit Counsel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Cockpit Counsel. My name's Tim. I'm the CLO at LinkSquares. As always, we have our producer, Alyssa Verzino. And today we have with us Bob Cahill. Bob's held CEO positions, CFO positions at public companies, private companies, venture companies, private equity companies, and is here to talk to us today a little bit about how he's seeing the relationship between the executive team and legal changing over the years. Bob, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you. And as a side note, we may or may not weave in some Oktoberfest conversations here, but we'll try to keep it.
That's a curveball. We'll have to muck along.
So we start off every show exactly the same. It's a pilot-themed, aviation-themed podcast. We always ask what your pre-flight ritual is.
It actually has changed a bit. As a younger man, it would probably be a cocktail or two.
Okay.
But I'm finding now it's like, okay, that's maybe, maybe not in the best interest of my health. No. So usually get on early and get settled and do some reading, and we try to take that 5-minute nap when the door first closes and the compression kicks in.
Nice.
That's it.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about your career path, and maybe obviously you've had a great career, continues to be. What are like 2 or 3 of your favorite positions that you've had?
So, if I step back, and I tell this story a lot, I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up, when I first started. So, I got out of university, joined Ernst & Young, and started out my career as typical CPA track. And I probably knew within 6 months that this is not where I wanted to go in life.
Right.
Great foundation, great chance to see a lot of different verticals and a lot of different industries. And when I finally got assigned to a software company, which was somewhat novel at that time, because a few years back when software wasn't everywhere, I had one of those like epiphany moments in your life where I'm like, aha, this is going to change the world. Software and technology, as regardless of B2C, B2B, what industry, everything's going to be impacted by this in a dramatic way. And from there on, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I've been in software companies ever since, pretty much the past 2 decades. Yeah. And as you said, private venture, whatever. I'd say that there's no one favorite because I've really been fairly agnostic as to the verticals that I've been in. So I've been in ed tech, I've been in gambling, I've been in B2B enterprise, traditional, I've been in HCM. So it's, I think it's really, for me, it's not so much any one company as much as the sort of the delight of taking a company from relatively early stage typically, and see it prosper once you find that product market fit and really start to accelerate.
Yeah, that aspect of scaling is a ton of fun. It's great to see. Well, so when we met, it was at Everest. How early were you in at Everest, or world winner before Everest?
Right. So I was probably employee number 30, maybe.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
It's a very small shop.
Yeah.
Out in Arlington, I think, just outside of Boston, and really was sort of very early stage. And the 2 founders, 6 months into my tenure, the 2 founders said, "You know what, Bob, doing a great job. Keep an eye on things. We're moving to LA." And I said, okay. Great. And from there, I sort of just took over most of day-to-day responsibility running the company. And that sort of kept scaling. And ultimately, we were able to, we said, okay, well, they kind of wanted an exit. And I said, well, I don't want to exit. We're just getting going here.
Right.
So we ended up going and getting them a deal where they got out 100%. We brought in new investors. And from that, we were able to really accelerate, invest all the capital back, and all the money we were making back into the business, and really start to explode. And so that sort of on a net revenue basis sort of went from 20 to like 150 in about 3.5 years or something.
That's incredible.
That's and you were part of that, half that journey anyway, right? So it was great. And that's the fun stuff when you really have a chance to double down, really invest in things that are working.
Yeah, it's incredible to see, and it's incredible to see those around you like really start to mature and blossom in their roles too. A lot of times you get people who can do the 50 to 150 employees, but can't do the 150 to 3 or 4 or 500 stretch.
It is probably one of the most important skill sets that I've found and had to develop as sort of you get into senior leadership roles is the ability not only to assess and find great talent and bring them into an organization and mentor them, and but also identify when they're going to hit their ceiling, and not everyone is infinitely scalable.
Right.
So real art form is seeing it 6 months ahead of time because if you need to swap out a senior leader in your organization, it might take 6 months to backfill that role. And so kind of identifying that, and it doesn't mean these people are falling down per se. They've maxed out on what they're capable of doing at your organization. So I've developed a knack for that, which sucks in some ways because you kind of see, really like this person, they do a great job now, but they are going to fall down when we add another 250 people and another 100 million of revenue. So we better start fixing that.
What do you find is more important when you're thinking about scale? Is it more the size of the organization in terms of headcount, or is it complexity of the organization as far as number of verticals or different types of product innovations you're doing? Is it just plain and simple revenue, or does it depend?
I think it really depends, but I think the bigger thing is balancing all the things that need to scale. So, revenue is going to, obviously everyone wants more and more revenue, but, the ability to scale people, processes, organizations, your OKR is completely restructured and changed. Pushing an OKR model all the way down to 1,200 employees around the world are very different than doing 100 in Boston, which is sort of my last one, the run that it went.
Right.
So it's people, process, it's maturing in all things, and nothing's ever perfect.
Right.
And, as much as you try, something's going to fall behind, something falls down, whether it's technological debt or it's just simply you don't have operational procedures or, good software that'll help with human capital management, whatever it is. And so you just got to try to keep all things moving in the same direction. So no cracks emerge that are going to, slow down your success.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as how you've seen the role of the general counsel or the general counsel's office, or just generally in-house attorneys, how have you seen that change? Maybe compared to 15 years ago versus 5 years ago, and then maybe talk a little bit about it in terms of the size of the organization.
Right. So I think we talked about this in the past because,
Sure.
Just given our respective roles.
Right.
I've seen, the role of GC or CLO title evolve quite a bit in the fact that much more of a business advisor than it used to be. And similar to even the CFO role is sort of these roles that used to be deemed as sort of overhead.
Yeah.
Not necessarily strategic, not necessarily core to the product or core to the strategy or core to the operations, but more of a back office function. The contracts have to be right, and we got to review this, and it's T's and C's, and it's NDAs, and it's all the usual stuff. That's, of course, all still part of the job.
It's the lowest bar.
It's the low, exactly.
The bare minimum.
Yeah, that is table stakes.
Yeah.
What to see now is like, okay, let's bring a legal prism onto our business, our operations, our strategy, whatever it may be, and think out front and say, okay, well, what are things that we need to be doing? Obviously, if you're offering a legal product, it's a little different because that's a product orientation.
Sure.
In the case of LinkSquares, but I think in general, I look for GC as a partner on the C-suite with the other executives, bringing in their perspective, and it's changed a lot. That really has been something that's happened over the past 10 years or so.
Let me talk about life before LinkSquares, because this is a different animal because it is a legal tech. Like, I'm a user, it's a very different animal. But even over the course of my career, I've seen expectations evolve, and some of that is, I think, a function of how I've developed as an individual and the level of trust that development has allowed me to attain. But particularly looking at even just the last 3 to 4 years that I was at DK, at that trajectory, I know that Jason expected something very different from me at each stage of the company. And even here, as we've grown from a pure legal executive team representative Vishal's expectations on what he wants me to bring to the table have changed.
Well, that's how we talked about the scalability. You know, and so your leaders are not infinitely scalable. Some are, some aren't. But it's really, the way you probably, good job securities. Are you scaling? Are you thinking ahead? I know you're a hockey guy, so do the classic Gretzky analogy, but you have to know where the puck is going to be, not where it is, right?
Right.
It's a little bit of that. That's, it's cliche, but it's really true. And so I think that is, is companies are scaling, executives who evolve, who anticipate that growth and sort of adjust to where they're going to find a longer tenure than perhaps others.
Have you found that as an executive team, your teams are demanding more business level insights? And what I'm getting at here is I know like the more data that my team is able to get and gather, the more accountable we become to manage to particular standards or particular thresholds with that data. I know anecdotally a lot of the attorneys that I've talked to, whether it's at conferences or just within my network, they seem to be getting a top-down push where their counterparts on the executive team are all expected to have data.
Right.
And it's kind of weird when the legal team doesn't.
It's a big issue for a lot of companies. And, you hear about a lot of things right now around unstructured data and structured data. And, AI is not going to work with unstructured data, whatever AI you think is going to happen. So I've always been a data-driven executive, and I've historically tried to have the business intelligence function, or whatever you call it, report into one department. I prefer it to go to finance because they tend to be the best policemen. They don't tend to have a skin in the game.
Spoken like a true, finance guy.
Exactly. But, I have my favorite saying is one truth.
Yeah.
They're all working from one truth, one set of data. There's nothing worse than I've had this happen. You go into a board meeting and you present this big deck to the board, and, the CRO or the CMO starts presenting metrics that aren't the same as the ones that the finance guy has. Now, of course, the finance guy's is right because this.
Sure.
I'm only kidding. But, but it's embarrassing. It's like, well, wait a second. So you're asking the board to advise and help you make decisions, yet you're giving them disparate sets of information. That's not only embarrassing, it is bad for the company. So I really am a big advocate in best practice around centralization of data. And I think it's going to be very powerful, more and more powerful now as, AI or machine learning or automation takes away some of the raw processing or processes needed to get that data.
Right.
So cleansing and everything else is just more important than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. So you made the transition from CFO to a CEO.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. What were some of the challenges? And, other than, being very CFO centric and thinking the finance team leads all, what?
I mean, I'm not naive enough to think that that's always the case. But
I'm giving you a bit of a hard
absolutely.
time.
I would say this. The number one thing is that, the biggest transition is when you're the CFO or you're in the C-suite, you've got 7 or 8 other executives that are your colleagues. They're your peers, and you're all working together. You all have one boss. Right. And so, and the boss is smart that either sometimes you pissed off at him or her, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you're hopefully looking for inspiration from that leader. So you flip the thing, and suddenly, all your colleagues now are your subordinates, and they report to you.
Right.
And that's a change, and the relationship changes. And they say it's lonely at the top, right? But it kind of is, because you don't have, any. You really don't have a peer in your organization anymore, because you can't share everything with, any preferred executive, because you might have to fire that person at some point. You need to give them performance reviews, and you need to call them out when they're not, living up to your standards. So it's a little tricky, but you still have your boss in the form of the board of directors and the shareholders. So it's an interesting place to be. It's still a wonderful journey, and you're still working closely. I try to have a very collegial relationship with the C-suite, because you're still sort of in it, but it is definitely, that's the biggest transition. And so what I found is but you still need sounding boards. You need people you can go to for advice, and not people that necessarily, and you go to the board, of course, but they also can fire you. So it's
Right.
they're wary about asking certain questions. So having an executive coach I found was very important. Somebody you could do independent, you can bounce things off of, or vent to,
Sure.
and having other CEOs, whether they're retired or existing, that kind of have seen things the way, or seen problems from your perspective, and can help give you good advice.
So as far as working directly with legal, as a CEO, you're obviously not the one to be hopefully chasing your legal team around.
Right.
Talk about the lawyers and what they've done that have made life easiest for you.
Well, I think, some of it is just one-on-one stuff. Like, okay, look, keep us out of trouble. Okay. Because they just think, your lawyers can just automatically just think, okay, well, what's the problem they're creating here?
Right.
So what shouldn't you say and what shouldn't you do? And just like things that are common sense to a legal mind aren't common sense to the average employee.
Right.
They just blurt out things, they say things, they do things, and they don't really think about the consequences, or they have to process it. They have to really stop and think, where it's all inherent to someone who's grown up. Now, up in, kind of come up there understanding, implications and litigation and and the problems that kind of stuff. So
lawyers are trained to go and
doing their fundamental job.
Yeah.
But again, it's sort of like that's again somewhat table stakes. It's like, okay, don't do things and don't sign things without looking at me, and
right.
And they know what clauses right to. They always point to, Bob, you read the contract, the business stuff. Here's the two that you got to worry about. Okay, those are going to get you in trouble. We don't like that, whatever.
Right.
I think so that's been always helpful, but anymore now is sort of like, I'll tell you, at GP, one of the first things I did when I took over CEO is I put Corp Dev under RGC.
Okay. Because
he had done it before and he had perspective on, okay, here's the strategy we're looking for. So he had a knack for this and said, okay, kind of thinking through, okay, if we were to do an acquisition, and sometimes it wasn't necessarily, that we were particularly acquisitive. It was more like, okay, JVs.
Right.
And deeper partnerships. So getting into the ecosystem and understanding how this all could be intertwined. And in many cases, whether it's JV or whatever, the GC is going to be heavily involved, top to bottom.
Right.
Negotiating, reviewing, enforcing, diligence, all that. So having at the top owning the cycle, I found to be was much more a very effective way, say, of moving a lot of those relationships forward.
And I'm curious also, as a CEO, what advice do you have for a first-time CLO? Maybe in the first 90 days, and then maybe in general.
That's a great question. Well, I think, what I tell everyone is probably the same advice I give to a lot of people is sort of when they're taking on a new role is that the best thing, the way I advise anybody, like how you can be most successful, is try to make your job redundant or whatever it is. So figure out what it is your job, and then already start to train your successors. So find ways to do your job better. One of my pet peeves is people say, okay, well, job security is make sure I'm the only one who can do it. That's actually the fastest way out the door. And in my case, it's like,
same.
Okay, it's like, no. You want to figure out how do you do it better, more efficiently, leverage technology, or train the next person, because if you're doing your job well, you're taking the next step. So I think right away is figuring that out and keep progressing. And I think people who do that are going to have the best chance to continue to climb the ladder and be successful.
Nice. Great answer.
That makes a ton of, I do the exact same thing. Like, it's always difficult when you see people that are operating in that way, because they tend to be very territorial.
Right.
And when you have a territory, particularly someone in a leadership position who's territorial, it's nothing but problematic for the org.
Yep.
Right. You get a complete communication block. You get an inability to work cross-functionally, and the whole business just slows down.
Yeah.
Like it's a massive risk area. Like, the second I see that, I'm just like, all right, well, I'm going to figure out, I'm going to talk to that person and see how that changes. And if it doesn't, then exit that person,
silos,
like within
ultimately
months. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good answers. And then also, as a CLO and a CEO, what communication tips do you both have to build that relationship?
For me, the things, and I've learned this so much, particularly as a CEO, that there's no such thing as over communication. It's amazing how often you'll say something. You do your quarterly all hands, and you send out a follow up email, and then you go and meet a department, see if they have any questions, and they ask questions like, did you go? Did you hear that meeting? I mean, that's I'm thinking to myself, but I'm not blaming the person or the individual. It just means that's how hard it is. And when you're flying at a C-suite level, and it's not that superior or anything, but just that you're not thinking the details. You're thinking about where are we going with this company? What's the strategy? And trying to communicate as much as you can down to the rest of the org. You can't over communicate because just to pound the key message. What are our goals? What is the vision and the mission? And where are we going with this company? This is fundamentals in keeping that going. So what's frequently my relationship with the C-suite and including the CLO is, look, I've got the biggest microphone or the megaphone rather, but I can't do this by myself because it needs constant reinforcement. And it also shows that if they're all hearing the same message from the entire leadership, not just the CEO, then they see that the team is in sync, and that gives them a great deal of confidence. And hopefully and it just kind of ripples down lockstep. Your VPs and your managers are saying the same things, and it makes for a very disciplined organization of all working together in unison.
From my perspective, I think it's important to first you got to look at it from two different perspectives, because not all organizations have their head lawyer on the executive team. A lot of times they're an SVP level or an EVP level or something, or a couple of layers removed from the CEO. And in that environment, I think you approach it a little bit differently. I think you're more likely to focus a lot more on creating departmental efficiency and trying to work amongst your peer group at that same level. And then doing everything you can to report up the quality of what the team is delivering and the way that the team is actually interacting with the other counterparts of the business. I think that is probably the most straightforward way to get noticed, and to start build that relationship and that credibility. I think if you are sitting on the C-level, C-level team, you're in the C-suite, you look at what the CEO first is spending most of the time on. And it should become pretty obvious, right? So you think about certain, our CEO is very much he's an engineer, right? He's a double E. And he is a very product and engineering focused CEO. He can, he could sell well. But he didn't come up through, like I'm a marketer, I'm a salesperson, right? Although he did work in sales analytics effectively roles, which was great. So he's got awesome perspective, but I recognize that he is an product and engineering CEO. And that's something where he's going to be spending a lot of time. So it's easy for me to get really involved in that and understand that part of the business. But you also want to think about what are the other parts of the business that really are going to need attention. And it's not an exposure perspective, because I think when I think about a successful chief legal officer, managing risk, it's just table stakes. And so the value that you really bring to the organization is knowing the objectives of the organization better than anybody else. Because I can't expect necessarily the chief whatever officer to understand everything about the chief technology officer's world, right? That's just not the way usually things work, right? Particularly with the stars of the show, right? Your product engineering, your tech, and your go-to-market motion. They should be focused on their own. They should have an awareness, but their real value is not being experts in what everybody else does. Their real value is being experts in what they do. For lawyers, the way that the lawyers become experts in what the lawyers do is by becoming as much of an expert in what everybody else does, because all of that needs to come into your decision making as counsel. And the better that you can do that, the better off you're going to be.
We can also talk a bit about like career advice. So like somebody listening maybe that is on the legal team and has executive level aspirations, but advice for them where they sit today.
Well, it goes back to one thing I had already said. So really just constantly see to what you can do to make you be more efficient and make your job redundant and keep moving. I think a level of tech savvy, doesn't matter what function you're in. We could talk ad nauseum about what AI is going to do, anything from from a minor thing to taking over humanity. We don't know where that all is going to lie. I think it's safe to say, though, that it is going to bring significant efficiency to every organization at some level, which is going to make certain jobs truly redundant. Embrace that. So again, the same thing. It shouldn't be something you be scared of. It's something that you should embrace and say, okay, I can be more efficient with this technology. Let's see how we can leverage that. It's not taking away your job. It's making you better at your job so you can take on more responsibility. And taking on more responsibility is ultimately what career laddering really is. It's learning, it's growing, and things shift. Your people skills develop, but it develops with practice and time and management. But ultimately, I think that's really it. It's constantly looking to see how you can be better at your job by any means necessary and teach others how to do your job so that you can continue to climb. That's sort of what I always like to share.
And on my end, it's largely you have to have a strong fundamental. Like, you never would have become a CFO without a strong accounting background, right? Like I don't want to say it goes without saying, because a lot of times it doesn't.
Right.
Like, your hard skills have to be good.
Yeah.
You don't need to know, like, for a lawyer, I don't need to know everything about intellectual property, filings and management and so on. I don't need to know how to get up and make a closing argument in a courtroom, right? But I should have some level of expertise somewhere that's impactful to the business.
Sure.
Right. And that needs to be there. I think from an in-house legal perspective, it's important that you have at least some level of experience from a commercial perspective, some level of experience from a corporate perspective. And beyond that, you just got to be a really good issue spotter.
Yeah.
Really, really, really good issue spotter, and be secure enough to be able to say, I have no idea, but that's an issue. I need some time. Give me time to go and find that out.
Yeah.
And I will. Right. I think you do that. That's good. And then I agree. Making yourself redundant is a big part of it. If you're too busy, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I need help on this, you're like, oh, I'm totally buried. I've got like this contract that I have to review. Guess what you're going to do for the rest of your career?
Yeah. Review contracts.
You're going to review contracts.
Yep, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So you gotta make yourself redundant, and you gotta recognize that risk is a barrier to entry. Your job is not avoiding risk. Your job is managing it, which sometimes means taking it with the confidence that you can resolve any issues that may come out of it in a way that doesn't completely destroy the reason that the business decided to take that risk.
It's probably my number one advice to CLOs, lawyers, if that I've had, is like, look, job is to manage risk, but that does not mean risk adverse to the point where you're hurting the business.
That's right.
You especially in early stage companies, risk is part of the game. That's where you win. You go for you find white space and you go for it, and sometimes it's unknown and sometimes it's scary and implicitly has some risk involved. But if you don't go there, then you're just a commoditized company and you're not going to succeed. So
that's right.
Nice. And to follow that, any advice for transitioning from one leadership role to another, and how is that different?
I think it comes back to a little bit of, what Tim just talked about. The technical skills is your foundation and probably got you to a certain point. And when you start to get into senior leadership role, more and more becomes your people skills, and not like, well, I'm good with people, but actually developing management skills, developing, the ability to lead by example and in words and actions, the ability to assess talent, identify talent, recruit talent, nurture talent, and exit talent as needed through the journey. Those are really, really important skills. And then taking all of your technical skills and everything, just Tim talked about that more holistic view, and honing that in and dovetailing that with strategy, with operational excellence.
And learn from others around you who are better at it than you are.
That's everybody. That's easy.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. This is the best part. I feel like most of my career success, I think, is based around learning a whole bunch of things from non-lawyers.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, between you and Dent, J. Robs, Matt Paul, and many, many others that I've seen throughout my career who have just taken me under their wing from a business perspective, they're like, no, you need to be thinking about it like this. Has been, perspective is key. Right.
Agreed.
Awesome. We can transition, I think, to some rapid fire questions to close things out.
Let's go.
So the first one is, what is your hot take on working with in-house legal professionals?
Hot take is there's always a balance between the in-house and out. And I don't want to say outhouse because that.
No, it's hilarious. Feel free to do that.
In external counsel, and I think Tim had pointed earlier in this conversation about that holistic view that internal counsel has. They understand the aspects of the business. They understand they've got enough knowledge to be dangerous in the key areas, whether it's technology or go-to-market, et cetera. Where I really balance that out is they need to identify, okay, I'm not a world-class intellectual property lawyer. We need to bring that expertise in-house. So it's really finding that balance, facilitate it, and say, okay, when you need to deal with this internally, it makes more sense than when you need to reach out for deep domain expertise within a legal issue that requires people that just do specifically that for a living, who generally sit in outside counsel, outside firms.
What is the number one thing that legal brings to the table during hard conversations with the executive team?
Attorney-client privilege.
Yes, certainly. Here's what you're going to say. Here's what you're not going to say. I think the hard conversations, and they can be tricky. This is you never break a contract. You need to exit a contract. It doesn't make sense anymore. This is dangerous territory. You need to terminate a senior employee. This is dangerous territory. It's a place where you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. You want to do the right thing. You want to honor a contract. You want to honor, respect the people. But these, everything's great until you have to fire, terminate, do something that has a strong likelihood of litigation if it's not handled very delicately. And so that's sort of where I really, really lean in on that.
And then the last one is advice for leading teams in a remote environment.
Okay. So GP, which is the company I'm advising now and was CEO earlier this year, we had 1,200 employees, 100% remote. 80% of those employees were outside the U.S. across about 40 countries. So it's remote work on steroids, because any issue you have remote work is exacerbated by we covered every single time zone, distance, language, culture. It was wonderful melting pot, but it brought everything remote work to a point. And I'd say this: number one is communicate. And it's, if you ask ed tech folks, they'll tell you there's 7 learning styles or something. That was the latest trend. People absorb information different ways. So you need to kind of say, okay, so we talked about earlier, webinars versus podcasts. We did all of that. So written, in live meetings, recorded videos, webinars, podcasts, newsletters, weave it into your, weekly check-in sort of, HCM application, whatever it is. Can't communicate enough, and it's bi-directional. We have to give a safe and constructive mechanism for upward and inbound feedback, and you need to address it. Like, okay, just dumping something in the suggestion box and never looking at it, that the employees become pretty tuned to that quickly. So I'd say it's with everything, it's about communication. There's lots of other things, the hybrid and the working theories everywhere. I don't think there's an absolute. You're going to lose something on either edge of the extreme. Yes, you lose the water cooler if you're not in the office, but you also are then recruiting talent in one zip code. If you go the other way, which limits your access to some of the best talent in the world. So happy balance. I'd lean towards more remote, but in general, regardless of how you do it, communication's key.
Great. Thank you.
So last question, Bob.
Yes.
Any charities that you're passionate about that we can help get the word out, try to get people to support?
Yes. Although this one, I think people will know fairly well, which is a Michael J. Fox Foundation. So it's like the leading nonprofit fundraiser for Parkinson's and Parkinsonism, which is the spectrum of Parkinson's. And this is what my father suffered from before passing. And so it's been it's a passion. We know that, several Boston comedian hockey players and stuff are very supportive of it. They've had the hockey games and things like that. So that's, I'd say that, while Michael is a, huge celebrity, obviously, and has a big megaphone, this is still early days of trying to find a cure for this. So there we go.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Bob, for joining us. As always, great catching up. Alyssa,
Awesome.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you like this episode of Cockpit Counsel, give us a like, subscribe, follow on all the socials, and we'll see you next time.